Hello, everybody, from WSU in Spokane. I'm Enrique Cerna, WSU Regent, along with WSU President Kirk Schulz, and welcome. And join us here as we are going to have a deep dive into what's happening into intercollegiate athletics and specifically how it's affecting WSU. It's changing. That's one thing we do know. Everything is very fluid. So we're going to be talking about NIL, which is name, image, likeness, as well as the transfer portal, along with Pac-12, what's happening there, also media rights, and we'll also have a bit of a conversation about our Cougar Collective and see where that's at. So Kirk, as a college president, now you have been very involved in all of this, particularly from a sporting standpoint. It's sort of in your background in handling all of these. I know you've been very involved in the media rights, but when it comes to let's talk about first the NIL, which is name, image, likeness. This thing is just really fluid.
Fluid is probably the nicest term that we could use. It's sort of gone from, everything was pretty constrained about what benefits student athletes could get to then almost, it seems like overnight, there's this Wild West free for all where people can move anywhere they want to and make all this money. And I think a lot of people, their head are spinning and saying, what happened to the world of intercollegiate athletics I knew, just 3 years ago, and it looks so much different today. But a lot of this has been in motion for a long time. There are a lot of court cases that were coming up over the last decade that slowly moved their way through, and all of a sudden a whole cascade of those happened at one time that really opened up the possibilities for name, image, and likeness, a little bit of the environment we see today.
Right. Before we dig deeper into all of that, I want to give a big shout out to the WSU women's basketball team, which really they became just this great team that I think so enjoyable to watch them on the court. Cammie Etheridge has done a great job as their coach, and just the environment and the energy there. It was great to see them have such a good year and then really shock everybody in that Pac-12 tournament. So, that was something else. I know that you and your wife follow the women's team really well.
Yeah, we do. And interestingly, we were at some set of meetings in Seattle that I had, and we got up on Sunday morning. We flew to Las Vegas, got licensed and play. I never checked out of my hotel room, left all my stuff in Seattle. Then after the game, went back to the airport, flew back to Seattle. But what a fun ride, and talk about everything kind of coming together at once. And then the whole Shania Twain,
right.
The social media impact. And, you got a major artist like Shania Twain tweeting and putting out to her millions of followers about WSU women's basketball at Washington State University. And for about 24 hours, we were the talk of the nation. We were on the front of the New York Times, and for really good stuff. And it's what is the absolute best about intercollegiate athletics, right, and what it does for the university.
It really is. And also, I think for those young women that represent this school so well. And it's really neat, too, because we have a lot of international players, and to see them be a part of this, which is, I think, very special. Cammie Etheridge, are we going to keep her?
Expect an announcement, a good announcement on that to come out any day now. So, the basic line is absolutely we're going to keep her, and she's excited to continue to build at WSU. And let me tell you, Pat had a conversation with Cammie before the Pac-12 tournament about, what is it going to take to make sure that you remain our coach, and the two of them worked carefully on what that needed to go. And for Cougs out there, people tend to look and go, well, of course, it's got to be all about salary. A lot of times it's not. It'll certainly, people want to be paid well, but it'll be programmatic support, charter flights, what types of things are we going to do? A key thing for our women's basketball programs are going to be doing a European trip this summer where they play a lot of fantastic programs over in Europe. But it's also a social opportunity to bond the team together and things like that. Those are all done with donor funds. There's no tuition dollars to go to anything like that. But that was also something that was important, is every couple of years being able to do that. And so Pat and his team stepped up and they made a few phone calls, and we got everything all set for them. So really, really pleased with the direction that's going in. And look, at WSU, one of the key things, we're always going to probably find some coaches that maybe people haven't heard of, and and all that. But as they're successful, like a Tony Bennett or a Mike Price, or go back through all those different folks, it's going to be really important for us to retain them. And as they develop that on-court success and in the classroom success, we need to make sure that we're stepping up and paying them where we need to. It doesn't always have to be more than what Oregon's going to pay or SC is going to pay, but it's got to be enough that says, hey, we value you, we recognize the success you're having. And when I got here, I had several of our donors came up and said, Kirk, they look back when Tony Bennett left and they just said, look, we're here to support the program, and as president and AD, you may need to make a few phone calls and say, if we're going to keep this person, this is what we need. And they said, challenge us to do that. Don't just sort of give up on it and say, well, we couldn't match it or we can't do it. And we've taken that to heart.
That's great. That's great. And a little bit of breaking news. I look forward to her being here for a while to do
let me do a podcast like this again. He's probably like, that's not how it's supposed to happen. But,
he couldn't be here, so they went out to himself. Well, speaking of Pat, John, our great athletic director, he recently testified before Congress about name, image, likeness, as well as other issues in a great presentation, and expressed some deep concerns about where we are with NIL, which is here to stay because it was approved by the Supreme Court. I mean, we know that. But I had put together a little bit of his presentation before Congress. Let's go to that videotape to see what Pat said.
NIL was intended to be the next significant benefit for student athletes. Like any other student on campus, student athletes deserve the right to monetize their NIL based on their reputation and platform. Although true NIL provides tremendous opportunities for student athletes, the existing environment consists of recruiting inducements, tampering, and ultimately pay for play, and is wrought with pitfalls and misinformation. Recent reports in the media suggest that current student athletes across the country are being approached with empty promises, which lead to false expectations. Let me make clear, true NIL is extraordinarily positive for our student athletes, and that needs to continue. It's what is going on with recruiting, inducements, with some of these collectives that are ultimately are fraudulent in what they're doing with NIL. We want to do more for our student athletes. Real NIL work we're 100% supportive of. It's what's going on with the inducements and the tampering, that's the challenge, and that's where we need the help. With federal legislation, with transparency, with something that proves that there's real work, something that provides clarity for Title IX, and also we probably need something that takes into consideration international student athletes.
Pat, I think hit on all the concerns here. And by the way, I dated myself when I said, go to the videotape, just go to the video. Anyway, we don't have tape anymore. But deep concerns, Jake Dicker brought this up during football season, and particularly when we went to the bowl game, and this has happened 2 years in a row, transfer portal and all of that. But NIL plays into all of this because it's going to get what a student is going to get, or a player is going to get. And not having those guys for the bowl games and things. But again, Jake Dicker talked about tampering and brought that up. Pat noted this, and he's asking, I know others want some type of federal legislation, some guardrails here, because as you mentioned, this thing is Wild West.
Yeah, I think almost everybody wants guardrails up, especially at the fan bases. And interestingly, we can think at Washington State, we have limited resources. We need guardrails up. Maybe our fans and donors think more than anybody else. I was talking to the president of Ohio State, which I think has the largest athletics budget in the country, as well as the president of the University of Texas. If they're not number one, they're number two, and they swap back and forth. Both said this is unsustainable. And so if everybody looks on these other places and says, oh, but not sustainable for WSU, but it certainly would be for those schools, even the presidents are saying it's all one-time money coming in. You're going to give that money out. And guess what? You got to go back and try and replenish that. It's not, and this is important for our fans to know, it's not like the Pac-12 media rights that it's a certain number of years and you get a certain amount each year. This is people send in checks, that money's spent, and guess what? You got to go back out and resolicit those checks again. And so I think it's the unsustainability of it is there. The challenge is, not to get too political here, whether you're a Democrat or Republican makes no difference here. it's hard to get legislation across the finish line. Washington is dysfunctional. And so the question is this rise to the same level? I'm not trying to make a bad joke here, but does this rise to the same level as raising the debt limit for the United States? And people can say, well, Kirk, that's a silly analogy. But if you look how long it's taken Congress to try and tackle something that if in the business world, I go, I can't wait 6 months to do this. I think that's our major worry is there enough impetus on both sides of the aisle to say we got to do something nationally, some guardrails. We're going to have to compromise because each side is not going to get what they want with a democratically controlled Senate and a Republican controlled House. So, right now everybody's pretty staked out on their positions, and it's going to require a group of people, presidents, chancellors, athletic directors, student athletes, to try and pull everything a little bit to the middle. And that's what we're working on now.
I had a brief conversation at dinner where we met some of the coaches, one of our Regents meeting, and we talked to Kyle Smith, and I asked him what he thought about this. Of course, he said that he hated it because basically, I think for some coaches, it suddenly means that they almost have to be agents. And it, they're there to be coaches and to also, do well with the players and get them through school. But it's really changed the landscape.
Yeah. Well, things we get used to seeing a certain number of student athletes on a roster, and you'd say, well, you graduate 3 and we bring in 3 new ones, and that kind of a thing. And now, boy, you finish the season and you're not sure 2 weeks from now if you're going to have any players on your roster left because people are going into the transfer portal left and right for lots of different reasons. I always forget that if we have, say, 12 people on a basketball team, that 12th player was an all-star in high school. That was a guy or gal that scored a zillion points, was all everything. And, going somewhere and saying, well, Kirk, you were good, but you're not quite good enough. You look somewhere else and says, hey, you're going to get a lot more playing time. When I talk to coaches, one of the things they would say is the ultimate thing they have was playing time. At the end of the day, that's what made the biggest difference to so many student athletes. And so it used to be that time you would sit on the bench for a couple of years, get a little bit better, and work your way into the starting lineup. To me, it's almost going to be like when we had all the one and dones, right? Kentucky and Duke used to have, these new lineups every year. That's, I think, what we're going to see in basketball. And I'm not arguing it's good, but I think we're going to see that in some of these things is every year you're not sure what 5 people are going to be out there for the season, and it may be a very different looking 5. So the coaches are going to have to work more like free agency, right, assembling their roster, and then acknowledging that at the end of the season, not due to anything they've done, that people are just going to test the waters.
Right. It's just going to change their recruiting efforts completely. Yeah. What do you want to see? Pat, I'm sure the two of you have talked about this. What would the two of you like to see when it comes to guardrails or federal legislation?
I'm still figuring that out. I think that the environment where if a coach left, all the players couldn't leave. I think there was some stuff where people said, is this equitable? How come a coach can pick up and make a multi-million-dollar somewhere else and the players have no ability to necessarily move? Not the coach, but just go, Kirk recruited me and now Kirk's not here anymore. Maybe I need to be able to change. And before you couldn't even do that. There was always this idea that certain schools or conferences or areas of the country, there was a lot of money flowing to student athletes illegally. So to me, you want to open that up and make that much more above board than maybe it was before. So what I'd like to do is I think we need to provide student athletes more of a center nationally where they can go and say, I make you an NIL deal, right? I say, this is what we're going to do if you come to our place. I'm going to make a deal I think is great for my alma mater or my institution or whatever I'm supporting. It may not be very good for you. And I'm not talking about the dollar figure. It's just the way it's constructed. Where do you go and ask for help? You can ask your parents. Maybe they don't know anything. I think we need some clearinghouse nationally where people can go and get a third-party assessment of what type of things being offered. The second is I do like the ability for students to be able to transfer. I think sometimes it's a bad fit. Academically, they can't get what they want. They're not seeing the playing time they want. I think they got to be able to move around some. Maybe you could do something where you can move twice, or you have some limitation. So we don't restrict it. We sort of say you just can't every year pick up and move again. I think there's a young man that'll be playing some maybe football this fall that's transferred 5 times. And you would look and say at the end of it, is this about freedom for that student athlete? I would argue say, well, they are an athlete, a student. And if they're a student, how are you going to get a degree from anywhere if you've been every one place every year? And what I worry about is a year from now, somebody goes, well, see, look, Kirk transferred 5 times. The system's all broken. Look, he got no degree. And I think we need to make sure that we have some ways that student athletes can come out of this with a baccalaureate degree from one of the schools that they go to. I think too, I remember being 18 or 19, and if somebody handed me 50 grand, I'm not sure what I would have done. Probably gone out and bought a nice car. I wasn't worried about my 401k or retirement or, you're indestructible. I also think that financial literacy is much more important. And it can't be the same as a way as, I got a scholarship and cannot pay my bills. Some of these men and women are getting up even to 7 figures. And how do you go about providing some guidance and some ways to help those particular students?
A couple of the students that testified before Congress, and one in particular mentioned that fact that he didn't realize he had to pay taxes. And, when you're that age, again, that's understanding kind of the financial system and the basics. One of the things that is happening at WSU in working with the Carson School of Business, that there is some effort here to provide that financial literacy.
Yeah, and I appreciate what Chip Hunter and the Carson College has sort of done to have some almost small business training for all of our student athletes and provide them some of the background.
I think every student needs that.
Yeah, I do.
My kids needed that.
But I think, this is also a great opportunity where we didn't go outside and hire some firm. We had great faculty here who wanted to work on this, and it was a great partnership. So there are some things, and we did that very early before the schools did. And interesting, a lot of folks came and asked, Pat, how'd you make that work? What does that look like? So I think we've tried to do those things, but when we put all those in place, I don't think anybody anticipated maybe quite the open free-for-all that is out there. And I think that's concerning. So the guardrails, I think we need to protect the student athletes. At the end of the day, we have to make sure we have a system in place where they can get a degree from one of the schools. And I think we need to make sure that we're helping them with the financial piece even more than we were doing before. And here's a weird one. We also have to respect the student who goes, I want to go to school, get my degree, and play my sport. I don't want to have anything to do with that NIL stuff. And we have some student athletes at WSU. Every school's got some that just say, I have no interest in that. That's not why I'm here. And we also have to respect that there are going to be some people that may decide not to participate in the same way on NIL. They're going to be excellent student athletes and great alumni from our institution or their institution, but that's going to be okay too. And people are going to make that choice.
Yeah. So it's going to be a tough one to figure out because there's so many variables here. Are we kind of leading the country as an example of what you could do for financial literacy for students?
I believe we are. I think that's a model that a lot of other places have looked at because guess what? All these Division I schools got business schools and with faculty expertise there. And I think people also want to sort of do that. So I think that's an area that we're leading. We're also in a unique position as a state, and most of our Cougs may not realize this, but a lot of it comes out of the commerce type committees in DC. The chair of the Commerce Committee, and I'm not using the appropriate name, but it's the commerce area. On the House side is Kathy McMorris Rogers from the state of Washington. On the Senate side, it's Maria Cantwell. So the state of Washington is going to play a huge role in this because we've got, our two players that are going to have a big say in where this goes. And guess what? WSU has outstanding working relationships with both on both sides of the aisle. So when I say we got to be the ones to help pull it together, I'm not talking, theoretically. I mean, I think it's really going to take us working with the relationships that we have, understanding the political stances of the individuals or the parties, but we still got to find a way to kind of come to the middle.
Right. So we can be the leader on all of that to really put those guardrails in place. And I know that Pat has done a great job in articulating all of this.
And kind of one more thing
Sure.
on this. I think it's easy to say, we want a complete solution. We want it all done. We want this beautiful
Everybody
package.
wants that.
We're going to move it through. I think what is more likely is you sort of pick a skinnier package of guardrails that both sides can go, well, it's not everything we wanted, but it probably would be a good start. And I think we almost got to do that, show some success, and then, sort of expand it out a little bit. And I think part of what I think has derailed it a little bit is everybody wants the complete solution to everything. And I just don't think that that's practically possible.
Let's talk about the transfer portal, which really kind of goes hand in hand with all of this too, because I know the one thing that is, as a Cougar fan, has irritated me the last couple of years is that come bowl time, unfortunately, we've been gone to bowls the last couple of years. We've had players that have sat out for the bowl games, and then again, as you mentioned, different players going to different schools all over the place. It seems again, it's like a draft that goes on almost at the end of the season. What can we do, or is it possible to put some guardrails on the transfer portal?
I think this is going to be a question that comes up more and more often as people look at postseason, whether it's basketball, especially football. It was really apparent in a lot of the bowls. And I think it's going to be hard to figure out how you put those guardrails in place. I mean, what do you say? You're a football player and you can enter the transfer portal, but not until you play your last bowl game or the end of the regular season. I mean, some of it is I can be the same way. I thought we would win our bowl game this last year, and then we were missing some real key components to our team. And, the other players played really hard and all that stuff, but you can't but wonder as a fan, well, what if? I think the place that we're going to start seeing some of this is in some of the NIL deals. And it could be that somebody goes, well, Kirk, I'm going to give you this amount of money for these endorsements, but to get it, you're going to have to do the following kind of things. And that could include somebody saying you're going to have to play in a bowl game if there was a bowl game. Do I think that's a good solution? Not really. But I suspect fans out there and people writing checks are all sort of seeing that. And I'm not sure that's too healthy either to sort of say, well, I'll give you this to come play for WSU as these opportunities, but well, you better do it this particular way. And then if you don't do that, what happens? Do you not provide the dollars coming in? And what's the recourse for the student athlete if something like that happens? Because it's a deal not by the university, but by a third party. So I don't mean to be negative. It's just it is complex, but I think we've got some ideas about how we need to kind of move slowly down the road, bring people together. The presidents have an obligation. If you've got Division I athletics, you've got to be involved in this. You can't step back. And 20 years ago, I had certain presidents I knew that would just say, intercollegiate athletics, I don't want to dirty my hands with it, or I'm not going to worry about it. It's somebody else's issue. This is one of those national issues that presidents and chancellors cannot afford to just go, I'll just let it sort itself out. It's not going to do it. It's going to require leadership. It's going to require intervention. It's going to require compromise.
One of the things with all of this too is that, and why we're seeking federal legislation is because each state is so different, and how there's no, Washington, isn't there something in our state as far as what it falls under?
I don't believe we yet have any legislation in the state of Washington around this. So,
right.
But some states do. And as a matter of fact, it's gotten so ridiculous in the Southeastern Conference, for example. There are a couple states there, I think Alabama and Florida, literally the legislature changed the rules to give them some recruiting advantages. not a particular school, but the schools in that state. So you even got state legislators now that are trying, how do we optimize NIL for our Division I programs in the state? And that just seems like a bizarre position to be in.
Yeah, it also just seems like it's not on the up and up, which is also an issue in all of this too. As Pat had suggested, or in his testimony, he's just concerned about the people that are involved in some of these things and making sure that it is on the up and up. Again, that comes back to, how does the young person know what to do? And that's a challenge, it seems to me. Now, there is a Cougar Collective that has been created in this state. Good friend Jack Thompson, and Thorne Simone, and Robbie Tobeck, who played for the Cougs and also was a Seahawk center for a long time. Good guys that are really kind of involved in this and trying to make it work. Is the university involved in that, or is that just a separate thing?
It's a very separate thing. And there's Crypto Cougs, there's several collectives out there that our alumni have put together. And I had a chance to sit down with Jack and talk with him a little bit about what they're trying to do. And we're supportive of those initiatives. It's important we've got to do that just like University of Washington does and everybody else. But there's some challenges associated with it. So if I said, Kirk, I'm going to give $5 to WSU athletics, it's a reasonable question. Do I give it to the collective or a collective, or do I send it to the Cougar Athletic Fund? And, we say, well, the Cougar Athletic Fund is what pays scholarships. It allows us to build facilities. And I can go, yeah, but I've been watching these players leave, and we got to do something to make sure that doesn't happen. So I think, everybody at first is like, it's going to be all additive. Well, at some particular point, people say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm willing to do. And, where does it go? And every university is trying to figure out how this is going to work. And interestingly, Texas A&M, the foundation for athletics is actually a separate foundation from the academic side of the house. So it's a 12-man foundation. They recently are attempting to do their own sort of Texas A&M collective run out of the 12-man foundation. And all of us are watching it, because if that is deemed legal and it works, it doesn't mean everybody has to do it. But now all of a sudden you actually have a strongly university affiliated entity that is in this particular business. And so everybody's trying to figure out how this is going to work. But it's I appreciate the leadership of some of our Cougs to say, let's put some things together and let's get out there and let's compete.
Is your concern about, again, I think you kind of addressed this a little bit, about how it would affect our other fundraising for athletics and other in the foundation and other things?
I have two major concerns. That's one. I think we can manage that. Probably the biggest one for me is that, my wife played tennis at Virginia Tech when we were students there. And, so this is back in the, 1980s. And if you ask student athletes back then, who gets the resources, they would say, oh, football gets everything. Football needs anything, they get it. And then we have Title IX come along. We really start making sure that we have better facilities, all this stuff for our fantastic women's sports. I worry that what happens is we're just going back to 1980. We're just doing it a different way. So, the quarterback, we're going to give him $1 million. Well, what about the starting point guard on the women's basketball team? Well, we really want to support football. And so what winds up happening, I think, is we're going to make it even more disparate than it has been because of what we're going to support and not support. And that is, and I'm not criticizing anybody in collectives. That's not that at all. But we already have tilted that field. You don't see a women's golfer going to University of Florida, getting a $20 million NIL offer. But there was a quarterback that they tried to put together an offer for about that amount that was, out there in the media.
Right. About 13 million. I think it was a young man.
Yeah. And it fell apart at the end of the day. But, that's a heck of a lot of money for somebody. And you just start looking to see how that gets skewed. And that's my major concern as well.
I think that's actually one thing that we hadn't talked about. And Pat did bring this up in his testimony before Congress, is the equity issue. in women's sports, and also what impact could this have on Title IX as well. And so that is something that is there, because I don't know that there are that many the female athletes that are getting huge NIL deals.
There's a few nationally that are doing extremely well, but I think if you sort of just compared, those are unicorns. Just a few. I think the two basketball players, the twins down at Miami, are doing really well.
Yeah.
Some of the gymnastics folks, I think they're maybe Utah or UCLA. Yeah, same thing. And hey, more power to them. But I do worry about just this way it's going to be disparate out there.
Let's talk about the Pac-12. Everybody's wondering, is the Pac-12 going to continue to be in existence in a few years? How do you see it, and what's been happening there lately?
Yeah, definitive yes. We are still be around, and it was interesting. I mentioned before to another group that I'm a YouTube guy. I enjoy watching YouTube, and so mostly recreational vehicle RV videos or go to camp. But anyway, so anybody who watches YouTube knows they pull stuff that's in your interest area, right? It's a really good algorithm. One of the things that always comes up is these sports things about conference realignment, and I'm sitting there as a president going, don't watch and click. I just can't help myself. And for a while there was like, oh, these schools are going to move from the Pac-12 to pick your other favorite conference, and it's going to happen next week. And then nothing happened next week, and then 2 months later, man, it's imminent. It's going to happen. We've gone through this all year, and so it's easy for fans to look and say, well, of course it's going to happen. We know it is, just because I read this somewhere, I saw this somewhere. And the 10 remaining schools after USC and UCLA left have been really focused on staying together, on playing on the West Coast, being the proximity that we're on, the rivalries we have, that's important to us. And we talk about student athletes, but what so happens is student athlete, ooh, this is a lot more money. So then you go jump over there. And look, USC and UCLA made the decision they felt they needed to have. But I'm also pretty thrilled that we're not going to tell our tennis team, you got to go fly, a red eye, one direction or the other, to get out to play a couple matches and then turn around and come back. It's much easier for them to go to Eugene and for Corvallis and things like that. So, everybody's waving money and saying, oh, that's going to fix it all. Anybody who's done an East Coast flight after living out here for a while knows that is really difficult. So that being said, I think there was a bunch out there that Oregon and Washington were going to pick up and leave.
That is constantly. You were online and social media, right?
Yeah, and then I read something the other day that they were going to leave and they were going to go somewhere else, and they're going to take a much less amount of money because they just recognized that was going to be better. And at least my conversations with those schools, they have no desire to go to some league where you're going to be on the B list in a league and stuff like that. So I think people need to relax a little bit and calm down.
So what was up with all of that? I mean, because it seemed like every week you were seeing some type of headline or somebody's pushing that in social media. What was any idea what the intent was around that?
I think a lot of it was just this feeling in the sports world that somehow 4 big conferences is better than 5. Now, I've never understood that. Somehow 4 20-team conferences, or pick your favorite number, is better than 5 conferences with a few less teams in each one. But this sort of caught hold that was going to be the way. And so there was this death knell that only, 4 of the 5 were going to survive. I lived through this in the Big 12 multiple times where, we had Nebraska and Colorado leave, and then we had Texas A&M and Missouri leave. And every time, well, they're not going to exist anymore. And you're sitting at a Kansas State or KU or Iowa State or these, excellent schools and going, well, somehow we're deemed as just unimportant. A lot of winning championships too, which is always interesting to me. But we were able to go out and add a couple schools, and they've done it once again. And I think all of a sudden the Big 12 was going to die multiple times in the last 15 years, and they're still there. And the football team playing in the national championship game against Georgia. So I would argue that you can survive and thrive as the membership changes and shifts around a little bit. So we're going to be fine. I think we're looking at expansion. Everybody out there is sort of seeing some of the schools that are currently being discussed, and we feel we got to get the media deal done first. Once we have the media deal done, we're in parallel working on what expansion could or should look like for the Pac-12.
All right, so you opened up there for me to slide into that topic.
Yeah, sure.
Media rights. Where are we now? A few months ago, I think I heard you say, "Oh yeah, it's going to be done here pretty soon." And then here we are.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop saying that because I'm just no different than the folks about the schools leaving, right? We've had really, really good conversations with major media outlets and recognizable ones that everybody goes, "Oh yeah, I can click on the TV and watch that," over the last 6 months. But as we've seen different entities out there, ESPN is a great example. They laid off a whole bunch of employees. If you said, when would be the worst time in the last 6 years to try and negotiate a media deal, probably the last 5 months is going to be pretty close to the worst. And so what's been happening is we've continued to have those conversations with recognizable major media outlets. They're very interested in the Pac-12. People have to remember, you can talk about football isn't as great as this conference or that conference, but we occupy a coveted time slot where people need live sports content around the nation. People like college football, and the Pac-12 owns that West Coast time frame. And so that's why all the people are really interested in it, because they know they got a big slot. They want to fill it with games that people want to sit and watch with recognizable teams, and we're going to be able to do that. So our conversations are continuing. They're going well. But at the end of the day, if I'm a fan, I'm skeptical until you say, "Kirk, make an announcement, tell me the dollar figure, tell me everybody signed your grant of rights, and then I'll leave you alone." So until we get that point done, and I expect that to be this summer, there's going to continue to be this speculation out there about what's going to happen.
Why is it dragged on so long?
I think it's just the environment. It's the uncertainty in the economy, the layoffs in the tech sector and other places. I mean, look at the major media companies have almost all laid off people, and so have some of the major players in the tech sector. And, I know at least one of the partners we were talking to said, "We're ready to sign today." But the optics of us announcing that we're laying off X number of people and we signed, this multi-million-dollar deal with the Pac-12 are just simply not the best. So we're going to have to wait 6 weeks. Now, I'm not sure if 6 weeks make that much difference or whatever your time frame is, but clearly the optics was something that those groups are really worried about.
Yeah. And do you expect this to be kind of a diversified type of thing? I mean, not just one media company, but
I believe it's going to be multiple media companies, and look, streaming is here to stay. And I'm not trying to make this is some sort of weird thing to say, well, our whole deal is going to be streaming, but all those other media deals out there have streaming parts to it. The Big Ten Conference is going to have a bunch of their games on a streaming platform. So, because guess what? Every major media outlet has, their direct cable kind of stuff and a streaming platform. We happen to have a house in Pullman. We don't have cable. We have all of the different apps and streaming things on there. I can do just about anything I need to on that. So the idea that it's all going to be direct linear cable or network TV, everything's going to be this package of stuff that you're on different things. At the end of the day, when we talk to our media partners, though, here's one of the things I heard from Cougs all the time. I got to admit, I've done it a couple of times myself. I'm traveling. Cougs playing a away football game in my hotel, and I'll be on the West Coast footprint. And I go, crap, I cannot get the Coug game on.
Yeah.
And so we heard time and time again, not just with football, but men's and women's basketball, volleyball, these other sports, baseball. How come, Kirk, I can't get the Pac-12 network, or I can't watch us play? So that's been something we talked to media partners about. Is that's what people have to appreciate about the advantage of streaming, is I can be in Europe and I can watch us play if I want to be there at the right time zone, because I can just stream it. And I think that's going to be an important thing, is that can I watch the Cougs play anywhere, anytime with any device? That's what we got to have as part of our media deal.
Yeah, I have a good friend who's an Oregon Duck, and that's actually one of his
It can't be a
complaints.
good friend
I
then.
know, well, I know, he's kind of so-so, but he's my podcast partner, but I won't go there. But he had some complaint about the Pac-12 and the Pac-12 network, that you're not able to get it, and he wants to see a streaming type of thing where he could get it whenever he can see his game.
Yep.
When the Cougars are kicking the Ducks, so yeah. What's happening to the Pac-12 network, do you think? Still remain, or?
I don't know. I think that depends on the media partner. And there are going to be some media partners that probably will say, we'll just acquire and take the whole thing. We have other media partners that may say, I want you to continue production and we'll, purchase it. And I think it's going to depend on who the final, yes, this is who we're going to go with and how they want to use the network. We recently moved the network completely out of downtown San Francisco, still in California, but I think our rent dropped by some huge percentage because we were literally in a square block area that's in the most expensive real estate in the United States. There was simply no reason for the Pac-12 to be there. So we've actually relocated it to a different area of the Bay. It's much cheaper, much more effective and efficient. And so until we're told the network's not going to need to be broadcasting things, because we still have media deals, we're going to keep at it, and let's see what our media partner wants to do with it.
So let me ask you this. One thing that I'm sure you hear it a lot is from faculty and others that wonder about sports and why it's such a big deal. And it's a university. It should be all about academics, and that sports, they're nice, but it's not what we're really there for. And the changes that we're seeing here going about, how do you answer that?
Yeah,
Because I'm sure you hear it from faculty all the time.
I do. And I've heard it from faculty at 3 institutions. This is not a new phenomenon, but to me, faculty and staff fall in 3 categories, right? You've got one group that's enthusiastic fans, just like anybody else. They're just ready to see us go out there and win. Yeah. You have another group that says, look, we have no place being in this business. We need to be focused around what we do well, teaching, research, service to the state, and so on. Then I think you got a largest group is in the middle that, maybe they go to a game or two. They're okay with it as long as it doesn't get too excessive one way or the other in terms of finances and money and resources. But, they'll sort of tolerate it, if you will, with maybe tepid enthusiasm. I worry that with all the NIL, all of a sudden I've got, players sitting in my class that makes 10 times my salary and they're 18. That middle group starts shifting should we be in this business at all? And I think even some of the super enthusiastic groups start saying, well, when I got to shake their hand at graduation and wish them well, that was okay. And now all of a sudden, I'm not even sure are we just going to pay them and be here a couple of years. So I talked to some other presidents around the country, and we're all concerned about this. This is not just WSU. And so for the group that said, we shouldn't be doing this at all, to them, this is simply reinforcement that, we're turning into truly semi-pro sports. And if you look at what you say would be a semi-pro type of thing, well, you pay the players, you do this, you do that. We'll say, well, they're not employees. Well, you can go through all those definitions, but boy, it looks an awful lot like, a semi-professional kind of thing that's sponsored by a college. So I think that's a real issue going forward. And I wish I could say, here's where it's going to all land. I think you can get some guardrails set up that people look and go, okay, it seems excessive to me, but at least, there's a little bit of less of this free for all, money flowing everywhere kind of thing. I think we got a chance. If this continues in the way it is now over the next 3 to 4 years, I think we lose that group in the middle that probably at that point starts coming and saying, Kirk, it may be time for us to think about doing something else.
And this is why, again, some type of federal legislation or guardrails. Yep. There was talk in that congressional testimony brought up about making some of these student athletes employees.
Right.
How would something like that work? Or that sounds like not a great idea to me, but I don't know.
Yeah, this is held by, some elected officials, particularly on the Democratic left, that feels that there should be union representation and those types of things. And again, I'm not trying to make a judgment call. Everybody listening and watching have their own opinions on that. But, if I think when I get my paycheck and I, look at all this stuff and you got just money going everywhere from taxes and all those kind of things, we then look and say, well, maybe your scholarship's worth 25 or 30 grand. You pick your favorite number. Well, then you got to add FICA on top of that and all this stuff. And before you know it, it becomes this complex thing. We talk about financial literacy. I remember, well, when my youngest, he had a job one summer at Kansas State doing minimum wage, working outdoors. I think everybody should have that kind of a job at one point in their career.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was painting the bleacher rails in the football stadium as part of a crew. You don't realize how many rails there are in a football stadium, so you have to do them all. But anyway, he gets his first check and he looks at it and he goes, "What's FICA?" And I said, "Well, young enough, you'll get some stuff of this back, right, on taxes you're paying. But just think about that whole layer of additional financial complexities that go on top of, somebody being an employee." So I just think this is another one of those kind of trends that if we're not careful, the students or employees thing will derail any ability to do anything else, and we may not be able to get that compromise legislation. So we'll see, but there's a certain contingent of very influential elected officials that believe that is a non-compromise point of view.
With questions that were sent to us, and I want to pose a few of those to you. This is from a gentleman named Mark Billington, and he asks, do you foresee a time when players on scholarship are required to sign an agreement that if they enter the transfer portal, they would be required to reimburse the university for a portion of the scholarship monies they would receive, much like a buyout if a coach leaves before their contract expires?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's feasible at the current time. And I'm not talking about WSU, I mean anywhere. We're in a fairly litigious society, so the first time you did that, you're going to get sued. And then what happens is it becomes a national thing. That's how we got here in the first place. And so I think that would be really difficult to put that kind of thing in place.
Another mom asks this, what would you say to the Cougalummer fan who's become a naysayer or does not like NIL to open their mind and change their thinking around the issue?
Yeah, and I had to do this myself. I want to make this clear. I worked in intercollegiate athletics most of my career, certainly as a senior officer, president, vice president at different universities. And, there was a couple of times I came home when all this was going down. I just thought, maybe I'm just too old fashioned and I'm really out of it. But I'll tell you what, if you sit down with our student athletes and you do see them at graduation and you spend any time at all, you realize, okay, forget all the NIL stuff. This is still the same young people trying to get a degree and do the best they can. And it's easy to focus around a star athlete that's got some big NIL deal that you see, but you forget about the other 90% of the athletes that don't have all that stuff. And guess what? They're still there trying to do the best they can to advance themselves. So I would just tell somebody, tolerate a little bit of the NIL stuff for a while, but remember when you see that person walk across the stage at graduation, that's really what we're here about, and that's important to remember.
Another question here, and where's the NCAA in all of this?
Yeah, pretty absent. I think most people are aware that Mark Emmert, the former president of the University of Washington, recently stepped aside. Charlie Baker has stepped into there, and actually the very early returns on Charlie Baker have been really good.
What's his background?
He's a governor, I think an ex-governor, maybe in Massachusetts. So he's got some experience in sort of, again, this compromise, seeing a big picture. And he's out just visiting with a lot of people, asking them, where it should be. I think what happened is NCAA it's it's like showing up and saying you're from the IRS. You know, nobody wants to work with you or talk with you or anything like that. And it's never
like internal affairs.
right. Yeah, it's never going to be super popular, but at least you can be respected. And in DC, it was not seen as a respected organization. So the bottom line is you got to give the new sort of president of the NCAA a little bit of time, but he's involved and engaged. And I think so far people have said they think he can actually make a difference.
Well, what's happened to the NCAA? Why are they kind of a non-player in these things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was, so for a while, we always mandate, I was the chair of the board of governors, which is who runs the NCAA. It's the presidents and some external people. You know, we always made sure that whoever was chairing that was from a Power 5 school that had football, because football is, you know, in terms of the dollar figure, represents the majority of your budget. And I think, you know, they had some outstanding presidents that just didn't come from that background or were from football schools. And I think what happened is they got so involved in the litigation, we're going to fight to the end, that probably they stopped looking to say, okay, where are we going to be in 5 years? The old, you know, skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it is. And I think there was too much chasing after where the puck was. I feel we can use a hockey analogy since the Kraken are doing
That's
so
right,
well.
yeah.
But,
That's what they keep doing, so, yeah.
But I think that was really a lot of what happened. And look, those people out there who've been leaders, you know, leadership in hindsight is always easier than sitting in the chair at the time. We can look back now and say over the last 5 years, NCAA just kind of wasn't in the right place. But it's easy to look now and say they should have known better when the change has been so tumultuous that I think it's hard for anybody to have predicted this is where we're going to be.
For university presidents now, I mean, like it or not, you have to be aware of the intercollegiate athletic part of this.
Yep. Well, my job has changed tremendously. I'm finishing my 14th year as a president of a Division I school, and my job has changed amazingly from when I first started to even now. Intercollegiate athletics is a huge part of your time commitment.
Yeah.
The second thing is it used to be presidents could be academic, right? And you'd let somebody else worry about the finances. You know, you'd hire somebody to do that. Presidents can't do that anymore. You can't just hire a CFO and go, oh, they'll just figure it all out. So I think this is one of those things that, you know, my job has gotten more complex, not less complex, not just mine, others. And interestingly, around the country, the average tenure of presidents continues to drop every year because people at some point say, yeah, I'm done.
What is it, like 3 years or 5 years?
It's around 5 years now. And it used to be maybe 20 years ago, I think it's 7 or 8. So if people go, wow, there seems to be all this turnover. So think at WSU, 135 years, I'm only the 11th president we've ever had. That says a lot about the institution, the respect they have for leadership, and the fact that people, you know, if I'm a 10-year president, they're like, oh, he's kind of a medium-term length kind of guy, you know, because we've had a couple 25-year people, and that's pretty stunning.
Yeah. Well, you're what, 7?
Yep.
Yeah.
Finishing up year 7.
Hey, so you beat the odds here.
Yeah, I know. That's what my wife tells me that all the time.
Yeah.
You beat the odds. Yeah.
So going forward with athletics, I mean, it's just the fact that we could talk about this for an hour, and it is all over the place now. There seems to be some good things about it, because I think when you got winning teams bring prestige to the schools, but it seems to be very complicated anymore now. And it just seems we have to understand that the challenges, it's like business, just so fluid.
Yeah, I think it's the fluidity that is the biggest challenge, because we think we got a solution to some of these things now. And you and I could have this conversation a year from now, and you go, Kirk, I cannot believe how much things have changed in a year, and they've gotten even more complex. There's a few legal lawsuits working their way through the system, and there's one that would say that, I think, if I have this correct, you know, all the revenues generated by football have to be returned to the football student athletes. Whoa. Okay, if that, and it's working its way through in California, if something like that becomes law or passes, or, you know, is upheld in court, then all of a sudden your whole financial model for intercollegiate athletics is just blown out the window, because that's when you generate 80% of your revenue. How do you pay for your other 15 sports?
Is that brought by players? Is that a lot?
I just don't remember.
Right.
But there's just some of those kind of things that are floating around out there, and we'll also have to see kind of where things go, because that's, if people say, well, presidents or chancellors or ADs, boy, the ones that got us to this position, it was really people bringing forward lawsuits, and we were highly successful for many years. We were like 0-20. We just didn't win a single one. And so what's happened, that's how everything has kind of opened up a little bit. And that's why the guardrails, if people go, well, Kirk, just get your act together and put some stuff in place. The challenge is anything you do is immediately legally going to be challenged. And with an 0-20 or whatever record it is, the chances are real good that you're going to wind up just, again, losing and opening it up further. So
then it comes back to, is that why we need federal legislation?
In my viewpoint, that's the only solution that's actually going to probably solve any of it, is getting a federal policy in place that is good for all 50 states. You don't have every state doing something different, provides for the student athletes, make sure that there's some guidelines out there. Then, works. There's got to be some regulations on tampering and some of those kind of things. So I don't think it has to be 50 pages long, but it's going to have to include a few of these really major ticket items that we've seen out there.
Well, gee, this is a fun time in the sporting world and just dealing with it all. So, hey, thank you for taking the time to do this. I think it's very important, because I think there are a lot of people out there, they don't understand what NIL is. I didn't understand it. And I also am pleased to see that WSU is taking the lead and giving some financial literacy background to our student athletes. And I hope that is something that actually spreads around the country, because it's very important. They've got to be aware of how all of this is going to affect them, and in the end, could affect their future as well. So I want to say thank you to everybody that joined us online and submitted questions in advance. Also want to say big shout out to Kylie Condasta. You can't see her on here. Come over here so they can see you. Come on. Kylie is she's kind of my producer here. She kept me in line. Hey, go Cougs. And Kyle over there, Kyle, come on, show yourself. Show your face, just so people know. Kyle is the tech guy. He makes it all happen. And thank you very much for your time. And you got your great work. And Mr. President, thank you for taking the time as well. All you Cougs, thanks for joining. And even if you weren't a Coug, thanks for joining us. Hope we educated you a little bit. And we will see you next time. We'll have another conversation in the future here with President Kirk Schulz. Bye-bye.